Hi, it's Bonnie, and we're here to start a new quilting endeavor. We're going to start a Block of the Month club. Each month, I will give you a pattern that you can download to follow along. And by the end of the year, we will have tools that we can put into a finished quilt. As time goes on, I'll talk about different ways to finish the quilt. So just relax and have fun. I am going to do, because the demonstration requires me doing blocks at 3 different stages, I will have 3 blocks of each pattern when I'm done. That will enable me to do a king-sized quilt at the end. If you want a full-size quilt, just do the 1 block each month and you will have enough blocks to complete a full-size spread quilt. If you have any questions regarding the lesson today, just go quilting.com and that will take you to the libraries, not quilting.com, quilting at clinton.lib.mi.us, and that will take you right to the website connected to the library that I can answer any questions. Today we're going to start with a very basic quilting pattern, and this is the Churn pattern. Now, if you went online, you saw that I gave a supply list. If you look at the pattern, it will give you a supply list. And also in the library itself is a little sign-up sheet or little advertisement sheet, and on the back of that is a printed supply list. But I'm going to go over this together. Now, whenever I do a quilt, I decide on which, first of all, what color scheme I want to do, and then how many different patterns, different fabrics that I want to go along with that design. Now, the pattern that you will download just calls for 2 colors. They did a printed and they did a neutral. I rarely do a quilt that's just 2 colors. What I will do, I'll do a quilt that is assembled of coordinating fabrics. When I go to the fabric store, and if I find a line of fabric that I like, even if I don't have a particular idea right now what I want to do with it, I'll go ahead and buy some yardage of each of the coordinating fabrics. Then later on, if I need to go back and get another light or another medium, another dark, I already have the basis of the color scheme to go by. So in this one, this is a line that I purchased a couple of years ago. It's been in my quilting stash, and the longer you quilt, the larger your stash will be. And I have enough of this fabric, probably by the time I'm done, I could probably do maybe 3 quilts. But I never know what pattern I want to do and what I'm going to need the most of each color of. And also, if I'm going to do sashing and binding borders, I will need that fabric purchased. Now, I buy 3 yards of each color, and then I know that I will have plenty to do my piecing, to do sashing, and to do borders. Different fabric yardage would be required for the backing. We'll talk about backing later in the year. So once I have my fabric purchased, I can start adding to it. So as I pulled out this fabric to work on this quilt, I found that I needed 2 additional fabrics. I needed a medium and I needed another light. So when I went to the fabric store, I could take all of these colors that I had with me, and yes, I do take the whole bag of colors. They don't say a word. They're happy to see you come in with your stash, and they're happy to see you add to your stash, so there's never an issue. You can just have a lot of fun with picking out colors. I love to pick out colors. I love to coordinate colors. I just keep in mind a couple of different things. I choose 100% cotton whenever I can. If I can't find a matching color, I might go to a poly cotton blend. But what you're going to find, a poly cotton blend is a tighter woven fabric. It's usually thicker. It's not as rich feeling as the 100% cotton. And 100% cotton is the fabric that's been used throughout history. From the beginning of fabric, there was always cotton. So I choose the cottons. So I have talked before, if you've watched any other of the other quilting blocks or videos, you know that I talk about the grain of the fabric. The grain of the fabric is very important when you're sewing, whether you're sewing garments or if you're sewing a quilt. So the grain of the fabric is the stretch. It's the way that the fabric was woven. Here's the square left from the last quilt that for the basic quilting class that we finished in August. And you see I have my block, and when I pull on the fabric, it's very, very stiff. That means that's the straight of the grain. When it was put on the rollers to print the fabric, this is the direction it would have been attached to the rollers. The cross grain is the opposite way of the fabric running, the way the threads are woven. And if you pull on it, there's a lot of give. So you're going to want to make sure that as you're piecing your piece, that you keep your straight of the grains running together. If you put a straight of the grain against a cross grain, then as you sew, your cross grain is going to stretch. And all of a sudden you get at the end, your straight of the grain stayed like it was, your cross grain is going to have pulled, and you're going to have a little bit extra at the end. And trimming off is an option, but then you run into the problem that because the fabrics are off, that even the pull of the wear and tear on the quilt is going to be different compared to the block. So you're always going to want to keep in mind that the straight of the grain is the up and down of the quilt. Now we will follow the straight of the grain through the entire quilt. For our pieces, we'll cut straight of the grain. We'll sew straight of the grain. When we put our sashings on, straight of the grain. Our border, straight of the grain. It's very, very important. So you might have chosen 2 colors for your quilt. You might have chosen 3. You might have chosen a variety. I think in my stash for this quilt, I think I have 7 different patterns that I'm going to use. Now you can do a variety of mix and matching. If you're going to use 2 colors, it could be a light and a dark, a light and a medium and a dark. And then that would make just a fine 2-color quilt. I usually put at least 3 in a quilt block. And you see this one, I have my neutral color, I have my dark, here's my neutral again, I have a medium, and I have another light here in the center. And this light has more color in it than the outside borders. You can mix and match. You can have so much fun deciding how you want to put your quilt together. Cut your pieces and then lay them out. Lay the pieces out one next to the other to see how you might want to sew that together to get the best design. So the pattern that I had you download says on there exactly what colors to use and how large to cut the pieces. For this quilt pattern, you're going to be using all squares. The difference is you'll be dividing some of those squares into half squares. So when you're cutting your pieces, this is what your stash will look like, what your piles will look like. Now remember, this is for 2 colors. If you add another color, you would simply cut down on one fabric and then add your additional colors in. The first thing I'm going to talk about doing, we know how to do cut squares, and we know we need to line them up so that we have the straight of the grain. So I'm going to pull on this fabric. Oh, I have a lot of gives, so that's cross grain. Here we have straight of the grain. So this is our blue, a medium piece. Now I'm going to take, and I'm going to move the camera down so that you can see what I'm doing on the table. Now I'm going to take this medium blue, and this is my straight of the grain here. You see a very, very little give. And I'm going to find the straight of the grain of my neutral color. So I'm going to pull, oh, that's very tight. So I know that's straight of the grain. Cross grain, see how it gives? So I'm going to make sure that my straight of the grain stay together. But here I have a line going directly down the center of that quilt block. So that is a guideline that you're going to use when you're sewing. Now, most sewing machines, their regular sewing foot, they're wide, an inch wide. So about an inch wide. But most of them from the edge of the foot to the center of the foot where the stitching would be is 1/4 of an inch. I'm sorry, those idiot allergies. So what I did, I took my straight of the grain, I put my line down the center, and then putting my sewing machine foot along that center line, and when I sewed out away from that line, it's 1/4 of an inch on each side. So I would have put this under the machine, taken it out, and then put it under the machine again. And that way I have nice stitching. At that point, you would take your pieces and you would cut them in two. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And I used, when I'm quilting, I have a big decision to make in what color of thread that I want to use. Because I am using such a variety of colors, and there's neutrals and there's darks and there's lights and mediums, what I did, I chose a very neutral color thread. This is kind of a taupe color. I've used gray, I've used some that's tanner. I try and choose a thread that when I open up my seam and I press it, I don't have a dark showing on the light side and I don't have a light showing on the dark side. A neutral just kind of disappears in that seam. So I have taken and I have sewn on both sides. Now I'm going to open up my block, and now I have, and this is called a half square because half of the fabric is neutral light, half of it is medium, the colored. When I go to press it, and pressing is so important, I can't even stress how important stressing is, or pressing is. It really helps you work with your fabric. It flattens your fabric. If we go back to the finished piece, you can see that all of my seams are pressed nice and flat. And the longer you work with quilting, the more you're going to understand how to press those seams flat. Sometimes you just take and you go also with what the fabric is asking for. So as I press this, I made sure that my seams, I try to usually have my seams press away from the light onto the dark. And that way, there's not a dark accidentally showing through the fabric. You can't always do that. And some fabrics are woven tight enough that you don't see the shadow through, even if there is one. I try to go with the rule of thumb that the light overlaps the dark in the back. So what I did first, I assembled pieces of this quilt. And you see now we've done the 4 corners, which is on this sheet. And you can see I had my 2 large squares. And after I sewed them and I cut them apart, now I have 4 of my half square pieces. So let me open this. And here we go. All right, so now we've completed another step. As I continue on, and I love this, I've been saving these. I get them, I belong to several different online quilting groups, and so I get a new one every month. So I've been saving them on the computer so that I can send you the link so you can download the pattern. Now, the next pieces that I cut were the square pieces, and I have darks. This quilt piece, when it is completed, is going to be medium, darks, and lights. So it's going to be much different than the first one with the browns in it. But as you see, they're all coordinating colors. So the quilt piece blocks are going to blend together very, very easily. So I have my neutrals and I have my darks. And I'm going to take those 2 again. I'm going to find the straight of the grain. Those are the straight of the grain. And I'll just run 1/4 inch seam allowance. So when I finish, here is my finished block or my finished little piece. I'll open it up. When I press it, I'm going to press that light back onto the dark. And we'll have another section completed. So you're going to have 4 sections sewn together in that way. So here's 2 more, or another one, and then here's another one. And then, oops, went to the floor just a second. And then here's the one that I had not sewn together so that I could show you how to assemble those. As you're working, keep in mind, I was just noticing what a difference that looks like on screen. This one looks very light compared to these other ones that look very beige, but it's just because it was up. Now, the pattern for the churn dash, the pattern that you were given, it has the center square the same neutral color as the corners. But I like to add the color, so I decided I would take the same pattern fabric that I had for the other quilt, and this would be my center square again. I might actually get a little thing going where all my centers are the same. Haven't decided yet. Let it come as time goes on. So then I'll be ready to start assembling my sections. So we have completed this step. So now I'm going to introduce another array of colors that I have. Again, they all coordinate with the colors that I have just been using. And this is a dark brown. This dark brown matches the dark brown in the original piece. They were coordinating colors. I used the same neutral color in my corners. I didn't have to, I chose to. And then I added to this a very dark blue, and that was the dark blue that I was just using in the other quilt. And so now I have done my pieces. I'm going to have 4 like this, and we'll have 4 corner pieces. And then we're going to start assembling the piece. So I'm going to take my corners, my big squares, my big half square triangles, and I'm going to put them, lay them flat. Then I'm going to take one of my little strips and I'm going to put Look, I gotta spin it again. And that happens. Sometimes you spin your pieces, and sometimes you're going to find that as you're doing one block, you can do the same pattern, and by changing the way the block is arranged, you have a whole new pattern design. I don't want to do that today because I don't want to confuse you. So then I would sew these three together, 1/4 inch seam allowance, 1/4 inch seam allowance. I also made sure that my straight of the grain is the straight of the grain here, or the bias of the grain. Just make sure they match up, whichever way you're doing. If you put two biases together in order to make your design, you're still going to be okay because they're going to stretch at the same amount of stretchiness. And of course, in your pattern, you can only have the straight of the grain going in one direction. So sometimes you do sew cross grains together, you sew straight grains together. Then I took my other two pieces, and let me see what I did with them. I dropped some on the floor, unfortunately. So I took my other two pieces that were like this, and those would be my center blocks. So now what I have done, I have taken the two corners, I have taken the one section, I put them together, and now I have a completed section of the quilt. This would be the top row. To do the second middle row, I'm going to take, sorry guys, things keep going away on me. I'm going to take two, put one on this side, one on this side, with my center square in between. So that is going to be my center connecting strip. So I will complete another section like this, exactly the same. And the only difference is when you go to assemble it, you are going to turn it upside down. You sew it together the same, and then just by switching it and turning it upside down, you're going to have the same design top and bottom. So now I have assembled this section, the middle section, and the bottom section. I guess to you it would be the top section. Once I have those three sections completed, then I'm going to take and I'm going to flip over. Well, first I'm going to press. I'm sorry. I'm going to go back to the iron. I'm going to press my seams. Here I did a little bit different. Here's my light piece in the middle. So I made this set of seams go to the outside, and this set of seams go to the outside in this direction. When I pressed this section, I pressed those middle seams in, and these seams down. Now, when I go to assemble it, I can take and I can butt those two seams up against each other, because one seam is going in one direction and one seam in the other direction. I know that I'm going to have a nice seam that is just lined up, and they really, really come together in a nice point. So if I were to go back to my original one, you can see that because my seams were butted up against each other, they're perfectly, perfectly matched up in the corners. I'm quite a fanatic about quilting professionally perfectly, and so little tips like this will just help you so much. If you have all your seams pressed in the same direction, you're going to have this big lump of fabric, and no matter how much you press, it's never going to lay flat because there's just too many layers on top of each other. So if you press those seams in opposite directions, when you sew them, when you press them, they're going to be nice and flat and fit right together. So here are our 3 sections that I just showed you, all completed nicely and pressed. And this is what it would look like. I press on the back first, and then I flip it over and I press it on the front to make sure that that fabric is just as flat as I can get it. You'll be so much happier in your finished product if you've done that. And here it just shows you exactly how to press it. It shows you that here we pressed in, the seams in, and here we press the seams out. And that will give us our nice finished product. When you download the pattern, you can see it so much easier in real life than you can on camera, but you'll get the idea. And here we go. This is flipped over and pressed on the top, so it's nice and flat. So that would be your completed block. As time goes on, at the end, there's going to be different setting designs. I only copied 1 page of that. We are going to be doing a sampler quilt. This would be used if you did your entire quilt in the churn dash. And maybe you like the churn dash and you're done. Maybe this is all you want to do to assemble this quilt. But each month I will be giving you a different pattern to download that you can go by. And these are very easy to follow. They're step-by-step directions. It's up to you whether you want to use scissors or if you want to use a rotary cutter to cut your pieces. I'm working on a rotary mat, though some people love the rotary cutter. I was not a fond. This one has a locking device, just like, I was going to say just like on a gun, but the same idea. When you unlock it, then when you press the handle, the blade comes down and you can turn it. If you watched the design that I did, or the basic quilting design, I know that you heard that I was very frightened of rotary cutters from a bad injury that I had when I first started to use it. So for years I didn't use rotary cutter. A rotary cutter enables you to cut several layers of fabric nice and even all at one time. If you were doing a quilt that, as this one is, every block is the same pattern, you're going to need like a bazillion little squares and a bazillion of the larger squares that you're going to sew together. Then the rotary cutter might be just the ticket. If you have a nice sharp blade, and the blades do come in different widths. This is just kind of a medium width. This is a 45 millimeter, and I like this width, but they come in little tiny to do scrap box booking with, and then they also come in larger sizes that you could do leather work with. But this one, you would just put you would have your fabric, and you would use one of your rulers, and you would lay the ruler on the fabric, and you would take this blade and you would run it right along that ruler, and you press quite hard, and then when you're done, you have a nice true seam that's gone through several layers of fabric. Now, you're going to need some kind of rulers. A 12-inch wooden ruler will work just fine. You're going to have an opportunity, though, to experiment with different rulers. This, if you're going to invest in an acrylic quilting ruler, this is kind of a really nice size to get. This is a 24-inch ruler, and it really would do your job any size of block or any size of complicated. We might cut out some of our pieces and angles. It has different degree angles on the ruler. So again, it could come in very handy as time goes on. When you're doing your squares, again, you could just use a regular ruler. You could use that large ruler. But then, of course, they make many acrylic rulers in many different sizes. And you'll just find a size that will work for your job. Or you can buy a larger ruler, and it has all the markings on that you can make any size of square that you would like. You simply line up the corner with the fabric, the corner of the fabric that you're going to cut, and then you cut around it. I draw doesn't bleed out. Now you can buy lots of different kinds of quilting markers and fabric markers. You can buy markers that the ink disappears so that once you, within a few hours after you've sewn your block together, that line will disappear. Say this, the line that we used when we, let me go over to this one, when we did our half square. That line, if you used an invisible marker, a disappearing marker, it's going to disappear within a few hours. There's markers that you would add a little moisture to, and the moisture would remove the marking. So it's kind of just experiment. See what kind of one works very it you're going to do larger blocks, or if you're going to use more layers, you might want to use a really good 8-inch or 10-inch pair of scissors that really would give you a lot of force to size. We're only working one block at a time, so small time. I have trimmers. These are just little snippers that you keep at your machine. They really aren't. This is just for cutting those little threads as you're working at the machine. Machines do, but it's not real close. Where these little tiny snippers, they really allow you to cut very, very close. They're very sharp, so you have to be careful that when you're cutting your threads close, you don't snip. And I will do it this and have it come out either the day before or the same day. But at Tuesdays at 6 o'clock in the meeting room, we're going to be able to meet now. We'll have to stay separated. We'll have to wear a mask. But if you would prefer a class in person, then just go ahead and show up on Tuesday night. Bring your questions, and we can sit and enjoy a nice social time together. And liked, swap them a medium of yours that they really like, and that could be a lot of fun too. So hopefully this is going to help introduce the first block. And as I've said before, this is the Churn Dash pack. This one is a little bit smaller. This is an 11 well, an 11 3/4 inch block. So that means 10 3/4 block when this is, because we'll take another inch off. This is the finished inch. But it's okay. It'd be something a little different. And then, as I said, as time goes on, we went away for a few minutes. Zoom just went down and I had to wait for it to come back up. So please enjoy. I'm at the libraries on Tuesdays, Friday afternoons, and Saturdays. That if you have a question, you can bring everything in and I can help you out right in the library. But we'll do the class online. And then we also have an opportunity on Tuesday, the second Tuesday of the month, in the library meeting room at 6 o'clock. So enjoy. I hope you have a wonderful time and you have great success. And if anything today was challenging, let me know. But you're going to learn so much and you'll have so many new skills by the end of the year. I think you'll be very proud of yourself. So take care and I'll see you next time. Okay. Okay, save to cloud.